Growing up in the 1990s, Mega Man was one of my all-time favorite games on the NES. But when the SNES hit the scene and I laid eyes on Mega Man X for the first time, boy, I was absolutely starstruck. X was on a whole new level. He was cooler, with a much more mature tone than the child-friendly classics of the original series. And when I played the first X game, I fell in love with X, Zero, and yeah, even Sigma. Mega Man X on the SNES is what I personally consider to be a perfect game, and I believe that holds up even to today. Fast forward a decade later, and I found myself owning a PSP, as was the style of the time. I eventually heard about a ground-up remake of one of my favorite games of all time. Enter Maverick Hunter X for the PSP, a game that not only reimagined the original, but aimed to reboot the entire X series. And yet, somehow, it faded into obscurity. Why did that happen? Well, let's find out. So the first thing you're going to notice when you boot up Maverick Hunter X is that the classic 16-bit sprites are gone. They've been replaced by fully rendered 3D models. And honestly, this is where opinions start to split on this game. On one hand, I think the game looks clean, polished, and way more in line with Mega Man X8, which was released on the PS2 around the same time. The character models are sharp and the animations are smooth, and the environments feel more dynamic, with the use of modern lighting techniques and depth effects. It's clear that Capcom put a lot of effort into making the world of Mega Man X feel more immersive and updated for a new generation of players. But on the other hand, there's just something about those SNES sprites, right? The pixel art of the original game had a lot of detail and expressiveness that's hard to replicate with 3D models. Each frame of animation was handcrafted, giving X and the Mavericks a level of charm and personality that felt unique. The limited color palette forced artists to be creative, making every background, enemy, and character design stand out, despite the hardware limitations at the time. For some fans, this new look took away a little bit of that original Super Nintendo magic. Another major difference comes in how the game moves and feels. In the original Mega Man X, the pixel art animation made X's movements feel weighty yet fluid. Dashing had a sense of speed, jumping felt precise, and even little things like X's recoil when firing the X-Buster added to the kinetic feel of the game. In Maverick Hunter X, while the animations are smooth, some players feel that the 3D models lack the same snappiness. It's a small detail, but for longtime fans of the series, it can be noticeable. I personally feel like the game feels good, it just doesn't feel exactly the same, with the physics being a little different. That said, it's not all bad. One benefit of 3D models is that they allow for smoother camera transitions, better environmental details, and more dynamic cutscenes. Bosses have more fluid attack animations, explosions have more depth, and even things like the ride armor and background elements have a greater sense of scale. Plus, this style allowed Capcom to better integrate the day of Sigma animated sequences without them feeling completely separate from the game's art direction. So does Maverick Hunter X's visual style enhance or detract from the original experience? It really depends on what you value more. If you're a longtime fan that grew up with the pixel-perfect precision of the SNES classic, the shift to 3D might feel like a downgrade, but if you're coming in new to the series or you enjoy the visual approach of Mega Man X8, this remake offers a fresh perspective on a beloved game, even if it doesn't quite capture the same nostalgic charm. I personally very much like this game. The brand new character models for the 8 Maverick bosses, along with the enhanced stage details, backgrounds, and environmental fidelity, bring this game to life in a way that the original could only exist in our imaginations as kids in the 1990s. I still have a deep love for Mega Man X and its iconic 16-bit look. Nostalgia and my appreciation for the era will never fade, but I can also respect and enjoy this fresh approach. The developers clearly aim to preserve the spirit of the original character designs while offering a new perspective, and I think they absolutely nailed it. But looks aside, Maverick Hunter X isn't just a fresh coat of paint. It actually brings some much-needed quality-of-life improvements that make the experience smoother and more modern. First and foremost, the password system is finally gone. Yes, Capcom ditched that archaic relic of the past, meaning no more scribbling down long alphanumeric codes or, worse, misreading your own handwriting and losing hours of progress. Now, you can simply save your game and pick up right where you left off like a modern game. It's a small change, but it's one that makes replaying Mega Man X feel so much more convenient. Another welcome tweak is full button remapping. You could do this in the original game, but only from the start menu. In this one, you can pause the game, go in, and you can remap any button to be any other button that you feel like. It might not seem like a big deal, but if you ever struggled with the default control scheme in a Mega Man X game, especially trying to dash, jump, or fire all at once, you know how much a game changer this is. Being able to customize your controls anytime you want during gameplay is really, really nice. While these upgrades may not seem groundbreaking on their own, they work together to make Maverick Hunter X feel like a refined, more accessible, and ultimately more approachable version of the SNES classic. In my honest opinion, I think it's still the same legendary game at its core, just polished in all the right ways to present something new, but not lesser than the original. One of the highlights of any Mega Man X game has always been the boss battles. And Maverick Hunter X is no different. The remade game keeps the iconic Maverick bosses from the original while adding a fresh coat of paint and some updated mechanics to make them feel as challenging as ever. Each of the 8 Maverick bosses is still themed after an animal, and defeating them in a specific order grants you unique weapons, adding that classic strategy of exploiting weaknesses. But with new voice acting and remixed stage designs, these encounters feel a bit more dynamic. You're not just shooting and dodging, you're also paying attention to the updated AI patterns and boss strategies. And while the core fights are mostly the same, Capcom introduced a small few changes. For example, the final form of Sigma has a revamped arena and attack patterns, making it feel like a more epic showdown. If you play on the newly minted hard mode, all of the enemies and bosses have new updated AI that almost completely changes the game and adds more depth and variety to their behavior and attack patterns. If you're playing through the Vile mode, you get a completely new, different set of abilities and strategies for taking down the Mavericks as well, making the boss fights feel even more varied. It's the same bosses, but with new tools at your disposal, keeping things exciting on every playthrough. Using Vile's toolkit to take down bosses and enemies really makes you rethink your strategies. He's not as fast or as strong as X, but he has a bunch of different abilities that make tackling things different in their own way. Alright, let's talk story. If you've played Mega Man X, you probably think you know how this goes. Reploids go homicidal, Sigma is the bad guy, X and Zero team up to stop the Maverick Uprising, the end. But Maverick Hunter X doesn't just retell the same story. It reimagines it, fleshing out the characters, adding cutscenes, and even giving us an entirely new way to experience the game. So let's break it down. Right from the jump, Maverick Hunter X leans harder into storytelling than the Super Nintendo original. We get a brand new opening sequence showing Dr. Kane discovering X, giving us more context about his creation and the uncertainty surrounding his limitless potential. It's a cool addition that sets up one of the game's biggest themes. What does it mean for a robot to have free will? And is X really cut out to be a warrior? Now, Sigma's still the bad guy, but this time, we get way more insight into why he turned on humanity. In the original game, he just kind of shows up as the villain, and we just roll with it. But here, we actually see Sigma before his Maverick days. He's actually originally the leader of the Maverick Hunters. We learn that he was the strongest Reploid of his time, and was originally designed to be immune to the Maverick virus. But surprise, surprise, it didn't work out. Sigma didn't just wake up one day and decide, you know what? I kind of feel like a genocidal maniac today. No, actually, the game shows his slow descent into his rebellion, including a key moment where he fights a rampaging Maverick, one infected with a virus that seemingly corrupts him in the process. It's from here where Sigma begins to question whether or not Maverick should really be hunted down or if Reploids should be the dominant species on the planet. It adds layers to his character and makes his revolution feel more like a calculated philosophical shift rather than just, hey, I'm evil now. And speaking of characters getting more depth than the originals, X himself has way more personality here. In the Super Nintendo game, X was mostly a silent protagonist with just a handful of lines hinting at his doubts about fighting. But in Maverick Hunter X, we actually see him struggle with what it means to be a Maverick Hunter. He's not just some hero ready to blast away enemies, he generally questions whether violence is the answer and even has what it takes to stop Sigma in the first place. We kind of feel these sorts of personality traits slip out as he talks to the Mavericks before you fight them, which I think is really nice flavor text that kind of gives more personality to X and even the Mavericks that you're hunting down in the game. Zero, meanwhile, plays the role of the experienced mentor, encouraging X to push past his doubts and grow stronger. Their bond is much more fleshed out here, and it makes Zero's eventual you-know-what moment in the game hit even harder. Kind of jumping back to what I was talking about with the Maverick bosses getting more flavor text at the beginning of the fights with X. In the original, Chill Penguin was kind of just like a non-character, cold-themed boss with no dialogue or no motivations. In Maverick Hunter X, he actually taunts X about his idealism and belief in justice. Chill Penguin is bitter about being stationed in the Arctic wastelands and feels abandoned by society. His sarcasm shows he resents the system and doubts X's strength and naivety. And then Storm Eagle is portrayed as a noble and conflicted warrior. He questions why X is fighting his own kind, and seems regretful that it's come to this. His sense of honor makes him stand out as one of the few Mavericks who doesn't fully embrace Sigma's ideology, yet is still doomed to fight for him. Alright, let's talk level design, because this is kind of where Maverick Hunter X really starts messing with veteran players. Capcom didn't just upscale the graphics and call it a day. They went full remix mode and reworked key aspects of the stage layouts, enemy placements, and even where you find the Dr.Light capsules. If you've played the original on the Super Nintendo enough times to have every power-up location burned into your brain, get ready to rethink your entire approach. Remember dashing into Chill Penguin stage to grab the foot parts right away? Not anymore. This time they're hiding out in Flame Mammoth stage instead. And the arm parts you used to snag from Flame Mammoth? Nope, they're in Sting Chameleon's place now. These key changes keep veteran players on their toes, shaking up the well-practiced speedrun routes and forcing even seasoned Mega Man X pros to adapt. It's a clever way to make an older classic feel fresh while still staying true to the original design philosophy. Oh, and don't think that Sigma's lair was spared from the chaos. The Sigma Palace stages have been completely reworked, featuring new layouts, tougher enemy placements, and even reshuffled boss rematch order. The original version had a predictable flow, but now, it's a whole new ballgame. Vile, for example, isn't waiting for you in Sigma Palace 1 anymore. Instead, you'll face him much later in Sigma Palace 3. And yes, those wondering, the Hadoken is still in the game, but unlocking it isn't quite the same as it was before. Instead of replaying Armored Armadillo's stage multiple times, all you have to do is clear it perfectly in one run this time. It sounds simple, but one mistake and you're doing it all over again. The real kicker? Capcom finally fixed one of the biggest missed opportunities from the Super Nintendo original. Sigma's final form is not immune to the Hadoken this time around. Yep, you heard that right. If you land a well-placed Hadoken, you can obliterate the big bad guy himself in one hit. It's the ultimate power move, and it's an incredibly satisfying way to finish this fight. Kind of circling back to something I was talking about earlier on in the video, the biggest surprise in Maverick Hunter X? Vile mode. After beating the game, you unlock an entirely new campaign where you play as X's rival. And just let me tell you, this is not just a reskin of the game. Vile plays completely differently from X. Instead of relying on the X-Buster, he uses 3 customizable weapons. One for his arm, one for his shoulder, and one for his leg. You can mix and match these weapons, but once you pick a loadout, you're stuck with it for the whole stage. And to top it off, the difficulty is cranked up. The game throws tougher enemy patterns at you, and Vile doesn't get X's armor parts. In the final boss, you actually take on both X and Zero at the same time. It's a brutal challenge, but an awesome addition. Alright, time to talk about something that I like to talk about when it comes to Mega Man games, and that's sound design. Sound design can make or break a remake, but do these things hit the mark or did Capcom mess with perfection? First up, the music. The original Mega Man X soundtrack is legendary. It's one of the best 16-bit soundtracks ever made, packed with high-energy rock tracks that perfectly match the fast-paced action of the game. So naturally, expectations were high for Maverick Hunter X. Instead of just remastering the Super Nintendo tracks, Capcom went full-on remix, modernizing the music with a heavier rock influence and some electronic elements. Some tracks sound amazing with this treatment. Spark Mandrill's theme, absolute banger. It keeps the intensity of the original but with richer instrumentation and heavier bassline. But not every track remade made it through unscathed. Some fans felt that certain remixes lost the raw energy of the SNES original. Like Storm Eagle's stage, kind of feels more subdued and less atmospheric. It really comes down to personal preferences though. If you love the classic chiptune sounds from the Super Nintendo, you might find some of these remixes lacking that same punch. But if you're open to a fresh take, there's a lot to love here, especially tracks like Armored Armadillo's theme, which got an absolute face-melting guitar upgrade. Now on to the voice acting. This is the first time that the original story for Mega Man X has been fully voiced. And yeah, if you played Mega Man X4, you might be concerned. I mean, that game did give us the now infamous "what am I fighting for" moment, and let's just say Mega Man voice acting hasn't really had the best reputation since then. But I've got good news. Maverick Hunter X actually does a pretty good job in this department. They hired some decent talent, and I think this is really the first game I've played where I feel like they've nailed the characters. X is voiced by Mark Gatha, who some might recognize as the voice of Damon Kashu from G Gundam. And honestly, he fits X to a T. X sounds like a conflicted warrior instead of a generic anime protagonist this time around, and his performance helps sell the idea that X is still figuring out his place in this war. Zero is voiced by Lucas Gilbertson, who would go on to voice him in later games as well, and he gives the character the perfect mix of confidence and badassery that he was missing. No awkward line deliveries here. Zero actually sounds like the veteran Maverick Hunter he's supposed to be. And last but not least, we've got Vile. Voiced by Daniel Riordan, this dude steals the show. If you ever wanted to hear a Mega Man villain talk mad trash before a fight, Vile delivers in spades. He's unhinged, cocky, and downright sadistic in this game, making him one of the most entertaining parts of the entire package. It's a massive upgrade from the original where he was just a silent brute with a grudge. At the end of the day, the new soundtrack and voice acting are a matter of taste. The remixed music brings a fresh spin to classic tracks, but some fans still prefer the Super Nintendo originals. As for the voice acting though, it's way better than what we've gotten in the series before. It gives the story more weight and makes the characters feel more alive than they have. Love it or hate it, Maverick Hunter X definitely gave Mega Man X the modern presentation I think it deserves. Alright, let's talk about how much game you're actually getting with Maverick Hunter X. The original Mega Man X in the Super Nintendo wasn't exactly a long game. You could probably blast through it in about 2 to 5 hours if you knew exactly where everything was and what you were doing. So how does the remake stack up to that? Well, if you're playing Maverick Hunter X for the first time and taking your time exploring, you're looking at around 4 to 6 hours to beat X's story. That includes finding all the upgrades, heart tanks and sub-tanks, and probably dying a few times in Sigma's Fortress. But if you're an X veteran and you know the boss weaknesses, you could absolutely speedrun this in 3 to 4 hours. Maybe even less. But here's where Maverick Hunter X gives you the extra bang for your buck. I mentioned Vile mode earlier. Well, once you finish X's campaign, you unlock a brand new story where you play as Sigma's most chaotic enforcer. Vile has a completely different playstyle with customizable weapons and a whole new take on the story. His campaign takes roughly another 4 to 6 hours depending on how fast you adapt to his more strategic gameplay. There's also a fully voiced animated prequel movie called The Day of Sigma, which adds another 30 minutes of backstory about Sigma's rise to power. And of course, there's the classic speedrunning challenge: how fast can you Hadouken Sigma into oblivion? So you're probably thinking, with all these changes, additions, and modern polish, Maverick Hunter X should have probably been a success, right? A full-on remake of one of the most beloved Mega Man games with improved graphics, new content, and quality of life improvements. It had all the ingredients to be a hit, but about that. Despite all the love put into this game, it flopped pretty hard. Sales numbers for Maverick Hunter X were abysmal, with estimates suggesting it barely cleared 600,000 copies worldwide. That's brutal, especially considering Capcom had high hopes for this as the start of a full-on series of Mega Man X remakes. The plan was to give the entire X series the same treatment, bigger, better, reimagined for a newer generation. But with numbers that low, Capcom saw no reason to move forward, scrapping any future remakes before they even got off the ground. What was supposed to be the beginning of something huge instead became a fascinating what could have been moment for the franchise. So what exactly went wrong? A big part of it comes down to timing. Maverick Hunter X released in early 2006 for the PSP, a system that was still struggling to gain traction outside of Japan. It was a great piece of hardware, but it wasn't exactly the go-to place for 2D platformers, and most of its audience wasn't exactly looking for Mega Man at the time. And speaking of Mega Man, there was another problem. Franchise fatigue was setting in here. By the mid-2000s, Capcom had milked Mega Man dry. The Mega Man Battle Network series was still going strong on the Game Boy Advance, but the X and Zero series had been releasing non-stop. Between 2000 and 2005, Capcom had pumped out Mega Man X5, X6, X7, X8, Mega Man 0, 1 through 4, and multiple Battle Network entries. Fans were exhausted, and the hype just wasn't there for another X game, even if it was a remake of the beloved original. In hindsight, Maverick Hunter X was a victim of bad timing and a market that had moved on. If it had been released on a more popular console or during a time where fans weren't drowning in Mega Man content, things might have turned out differently. But as it stands, it's a hidden gem, an ambitious remake that never got the chance to become the definitive version of Mega Man X that it deserved. Personally, I think Maverick Hunter X was released at a difficult time for the Mega Man franchise. It had a lot working against it. The PSP wasn't as popular in America as it was in Japan, and many American PSP owners were looking for games closer to the PlayStation 2's catalog. As a result, 2.5D platformers like Maverick Hunter X didn't quite capture the attention of the audience, especially when compared to the handheld games released on Nintendo systems. Despite these challenges, Maverick Hunter X was a fantastic remake that stayed true to the heart of the original game while making enough changes to keep things fresh. The developers even added depth to the story and characters, something the Super Nintendo version simply couldn't do back in 1993. If you're a fan of side-scrollers or Mega Man in general, and you haven't played this remake yet, I think you owe it to yourself to check it out. It's clear that a lot of passion went into making this remake, and it deserves much more attention than it got when it released. Well, that's all I have for you today. I think we've covered it a lot in this video. For those of you who've stuck around with me on this journey through the year 21XX with our beloved Blue Bomber, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.